Hi, I'm Erin Rigetti. I'm here with Partnering 360 Insight. We're here at Biotech Showcase 2016 in San Francisco. Today was Digital Health Showcase, and I'm pleased to be here today with Michael Young. He's the Vice President of Strategy at Klick Health. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having us, Erin.
Now, you co-hosted a panel, or co-moderated, I guess you would say, this morning at the Digital Health Showcase called Top 10 Trends in Digital Health and the Implications for Startups. And in that panel, you went over some, I'd say, the top 10 trends in digital health, and I had some questions about a couple of them. In particular, you started off by saying, or I think it was your colleague Jay, but you could probably speak to this, which is change itself was one of the trends. Can you explain that?
Sure. So we're in an information age that now has been totally accelerated by the advent of all of the digital technology that's come to play. So really the take-home message for the group that was assembled there was really to understand that while we were presenting on top 10 trends at this time, these trends are in fact continuums, and they are changing dramatically, to the extent that, just to make the point, that by the time we left the room, a number of these trends may have actually shifted already. So we're in a scenario where we are now information rich, and we are becoming to be less application poor. So understanding how to take that information and utilize that to good is really what is moving all of this along.
The data heavy end of things, I suppose. Now, in particular, I heard someone say in another panel today on digital health that there were some, I'd say, 190 different digital health startup companies, and probably only 5 of them, making a profit, someone said. Now, with your firm Klick, tell me how you work with companies to sort of head off these, any issues they would have in trying to go for success. I mean, there's a whole lot of companies out there. I mean, what's the model that you would say they should be going for?
I can tell you that obviously our end customers are in some respects the same end customers that many of these apps or other digital approaches are addressing as well. I think the difference at Klick is that we are very, very focused around the intellectual equity that exists in a huge community of people that we interact with. So the big difference here is the ability to take that intellectual equity and apply it in a way which differentiates those 196,000 different apps and says which ones of these really create value, which ones of these actually have value to the patient, because those are our end user customers that we're very, very interested in supporting. And I think as a core underlining part of what we do at Klick, what we want to do is good for medicine and good for people.
And it's also really connecting large companies also back with their patient. It's giving them a one-on-one sort of relationship back.
I agree. I think that you hear a lot about patient-centricity now. The patient now has come forward a bit more in terms of the way in which they are actually cared for. In years past, I would say even as little as 5 or 10 years ago, there are many, many patients who simply relied on the advice given by their physician. And you certainly know, you may have even been in the same situation in which you've gone into your doctor's office and downloaded things from WebMD or whatever and said, what about this? Well, I think where we are is the natural transition from taking information from your caregiver and actually being a part of your care. So digital, or certainly the social media world, has really accelerated the ability of patients to have that chance to have that dialogue, but most importantly, it's now given them more responsibility. So responsibility for your own health care means you've got to be engaged with this. So a lot of what the digital world is doing right now is trying to make things applicable for those patients to be able to digest that information. And that's very much so at the intersection of what Klick does.
Mm-hmm. Now, given that context, how has the world of clinical development and patient recruiting changed? And how do you work with companies?
So, the clinical development world, which in many cases is industry sponsored, or run by contract research organizations. CROs are the outsourced arm of many pharmaceutical companies, especially those who don't have significant internal development capability. That world is changing dramatically because reaching the number of patients that are required to produce the regulatory dossiers to achieve approval by FDA or EMEA or any other regulatory body has become a very onerous process now. It's highly regulated. It requires a tremendous amount of money and time spent documenting this information. And the importance is to come forward with really good, high quality data. In order to do all of that, it takes a lot of time. And we want to be at a point where we can accelerate the development of new medications and get them to patients sooner. Digital health has the ability to accelerate that without reducing the quality of that data and in fact enhancing it, as well as the relationship that is then built with these patient communities. So linked to what we were just talking about in terms of patients getting more engaged in their care, patients actually getting more engaged in the way in which they are studied. Part of one of the problems that we have in the clinical development world is that, in general, only about 4 to 10% of all eligible patients who could be in a clinical trial ever get into a clinical trial. And it's because they don't know about it, or they have no access to it, or their physician hasn't shared anything with them about that. So I think that digital health in the digital world, and certainly the advent of the internet, has changed a great deal of that. So the big change really here is access, information flow, and the acceleration, the speed at which this information is being transmitted.
I wanted to say, for some patients, they might be worried like, oh, my data's out there. And for other patients, they are more than willing to tell them everything about themselves so they can get toward a cure. I mean, how would you address both those types of people?
Well, I think you're touching on the topic certainly of privacy. And certainly, as we know, everybody from the people we thought were working for us to the people who we know are trying to hack into things are getting access to data. But the reality is, there's a little bit of, we were just actually chatting about this earlier. I think if you take too much of a conservative view towards this, had this happen in Cro-Magnon times, we probably wouldn't have fire. So the reality is, you have to give up a bit of privacy in order to get to what we're hoping to do, but we can do that in an orderly fashion, and certainly the technology can help us protect that privacy. There are no clinical trials now in which, following the HIPAA guidelines, in which patients' information is just freely available. I think it was pointed out in one of the earlier panels today that one of the panelists had actually dressed as a physician and walked into a hospital and literally walked into the patient records area and walked out with a few patient records. While that was a physical act, the electronic version of that is what the digital world is working very hard to protect.
Yeah. Stepping away from that a little bit, can you tell me, what is the Decoded Company?
Okay, so the Decoded Company, in terms of, this is actually a question for Jay because he is a co-author of that book, but it is the title of a New York Times best-selling book written about the internal workings of and the underlying philosophy of Klick Health. It also describes essentially an enterprise operating system which is used to, within Klick, we call it Genome, and it actually is engaged in increasing accountability, communication, and collaboration in our entire group. And it helps build a sense of community and an overall culture for our company. It worked so well for Klick over the last dozen or so years that the book actually created an opportunity for others to learn about it, and when they learned about it, they wanted to know how to get access to it. So, without taking a sales hat on here, what I'll share with you is that we found a way now in which to commercialize this, and through Sensei Labs, and this is really the embodiment of what was represented in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to the number of people who came up after your panel to give you their business cards. There's a definite interest. Companies want to know how to use digital health. Companies want to know how to work to get their digital health company, so to the public, their products to the public. So this is a really hot issue.
Good. Well, I would really encourage those who are taking the time to listen to this interview to be thinking about digital health not so much as something you bolt on. It's really a way of doing business. It's a way of integrating the way in which we actually all like to work and play, if you will. So those of you who use Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, we do that so much in our personal lives. Why don't we operate a bit more like that in our business lives?
Yeah, that's interesting. Any other trends that we should know about before we?
Well, there are 9 others to talk about, but anyway, I don't think we have. No, I think the big takeaway is honestly increased receptivity. Open your mind, be ready for new ideas, because the way in which we did things for years only got us this far. It will not get us, to roughly paraphrase another quotation, it won't get us to where we need to be.
Wow, that's awesome.
So,
well, it's great talking to you today.
Good talking with you. Thanks for your help.